So, our curricular issues project, to sum up this class, we picked professional development because we just feel like it's really important to all of us, and we had a lot of things to say and we want to research. And our project consists of myself, Megan, Valeria, Tanya, Noelia, and Brooke.
The definition of professional development is the ongoing process of training, learning, and skill building for educators to improve their effectiveness and advance their careers. This can include formal activities like workshops, courses, and conferences, as well as informal methods such as coaching, mentoring, and self-reflection, all aim at enhancing teaching skills to better student needs.
We chose this issue because as educators, oftentimes we receive professional development that feels unrealistic or unhelpful. Not only that, but we are expected to implement new curriculum and standards without adequate training, resources, collaboration time, or clear goals.
For our first article, which was titled Standards, Instructional Objectives, and Curricular Design, A Complex Relationship by Gamson et al., this really highlights the relationship between standards, objectives, and overall curriculum design. And this has all been highly debated topics of like what students should learn and how they should learn it and how that learning should be measured, which is not really new information. Currently, we are working with our Common Core State Standards, which is the recent installment of standards-based reform movement. But Gamson et al. Dates the efforts all the way back to the late 19th century, where groups such as the Committee of 10 began recommending common standards and academic requirements. Historically, however, policymakers and educators have battled with determining which subjects and skills are most important. And some educational reformers have continued to advocate for specific measurable objectives, while others have argued that relying too heavily on those things can really take away and limit the freedoms of educators as well as the creativity and deeper learning of students. They go on to explain that throughout the 20th century, national concerns such as global competition, economic stability, and perceived academic decline have actually been the things to fuel the calls for stronger standards. But the concern still remains the same. An overemphasis on measurable objectives can lead to fragmented learning and narrow instruction focused solely on basic skills. The article argues that while standards can provide clarity and direction, and most teachers would agree with that, they must be regularly revisited and thoughtfully supported. Otherwise, we risk overwhelming teachers and reducing instruction to simple checklists. This is related to professional development because teachers are often tasked with meeting standards and creating objectives with very little guidance and resources to get us there. Again, most of us would agree that standards and objectives are reliable tools, but they shouldn't completely control our classroom environment. And nowadays, our classroom environment includes English language learners, students with learning disabilities, and students that are in need of social emotional assistance. So in order for teachers to meet all of those demands, they are in need of professional development that is relevant, meaningful, and effective so that in turn, we can meet standards and objectives and have higher test scores while also empowering students to be curious and invested in their education. So to summarize, and to put it simply, basically standards and objectives in curriculum design are all essential, but can hinder effective teaching and overall student success. A quote that particularly stood out to me was one that said, whether standards can be unpacked and translated into realistic and vibrant classroom activities will depend on the support and resources made available to teachers. Otherwise, the aims of academic disciplines and the knowledge embedded within core subject areas will all too easily be shattered into the thin, disconnected shards of minor objectives, which in turn will ultimately narrow any broader vision of education. And moving on to our next article.
The next article that I picked was Chapter 3, Curriculum Theory in Leadership Strategies for Development and Implementation by Glathorn. In this chapter, he explains that curriculum theory is the bridge between the educational ideas and what happens in the classroom on a daily basis. He also mentions that it is really important to have strong leadership because when we have strong leaders that are flexible, knowledgeable, and are able to guide teachers, learning and teaching is improved. In this chapter, Glathern breaks down the curriculum theories in four different types. Number one is the structure-oriented, which focuses on how the curriculum is organized. Number two, the value-oriented, which looks at the beliefs and values that shape the decisions. Number three, the content-oriented, which focus on what the students should learn. And number four, the process-oriented, which looks at how the curriculum is created and improved. Overall, the main point that Glathern makes is that curriculum is not a fixed plan, but it's an ongoing process that is built through teamwork and reflection. And with the same lens, he also looks at how a professional development should look like and how it should function. He states that teachers' learning is as important as the curriculum itself. So for him, he mentions that in order for a curriculum to, I'm sorry, for a professional development to work, it needs to be organized, flexible, and focused with clear goals for the teachers because professional development is also an ongoing process that takes time for collaboration, reflection for teachers to grow professionally. Overall, to summarize this article, um, he mentions that educators' curriculum theory helps educators learn, reflect, and improve, and that we should have professional developments with clear goals. And that will help us to grow as teachers over time to be up to date with education. And one of the quotes that I found important was quality leadership means having a thorough understanding of curriculum and being able to change administrative roles and responsibilities when needed to meet new challenges of curriculum design. It is an art to know how and when to be flexible and yet at the same time to be able to make an important curriculum decision. And on to the next article.
I decided to analyze research on learning and instruction implications for curriculum instruction and assessment by Goldman and Pellegrino as my article. The authors summarize research illustrating that efficient teaching depends on aligning curriculum, instruction, and assessments. The findings of the article demonstrate that students are more successful by allowing them to engage in collaboration, discussion, and opportunities to reflect on their learning. Not only that, but the authors also emphasize on how assessments should provide feedback to promote student growth. This article is relevant to professional development because it offers a research-based framework for designing effective instruction. They emphasize grounding teacher learning and student development and subject pedagogy through tools like mentorships, case studies, and portfolios. The authors also argue that professional development should connect directly to classroom practice and address the real challenges teachers face. Overall, to summarize this article, the authors portray evidence based on how learning occurs and how teaching methods should take place. A quote that stood out to me was, most critically, pre-service teachers and in-service teachers need opportunities to engage in the kinds of teaching. And moving on to the next article.
The article I chose to analyze was the 50-year history of Common Core from the Journal of Education Foundations by Greer. So Greer discusses the historical overview of how the Common Core state standards emerged from a half century of standards-based education reforms. He first talks about broader policies leading up all the way to Common Core. He says that Common Core is more coherent and rigorous set of national expectations for student learning. Its success depends on effective teacher preparation, professional development, access to adequate instructional resources. Despite its promises to improve educational policy and consistency, Greer states that there is uneven implementation, limited PD, and limited support being provided to teachers. He states that without a stronger support system for educators and a clear focus on equity, Common Core state standards may repeat the same fragmented reform cycles of the past. Greer's article is relevant to professional development because it talks about the success and failures of large curriculum reforms, like the Common Core state standards, and that rely heavily on the quality and availability of teacher learning and support systems. Policy changes alone cannot transform classrooms unless teachers have the knowledge, skills, and resources available to them to effectively adapt these reforms. Having professional development for teachers can be seen as the bridge between policy and practice, helping teachers understand the new standards design instruction accordingly to meet their students' needs and assess student learning will be beneficial for these reforms to be effective. Teacher learning is essential to bring educational change. Overall, to summarize my article, some major points. Um, Effective PD should be long-term, collaborative, and coordinated, but teachers often receive very little, at times fewer than 10 hours. This also relates to one of the quotes that I pulled out from my reading that states the best professional development is often long-term, collaborative, and well-developed across levels and actors. After several years, teachers, um, still swaths of teachers profess that only having received between 0 to 10 hours of PD on Common Core. And moving on to the next article.
So I chose to do the article by Levin, Curriculum Policy and the Politics of What Should Be Learned in Schools. And in this chapter, Ben Levin, the author, analyzes the political nature involved in curriculum policy and decisions, specifically how all educational decisions are typically influenced by outside things such as like beliefs, public interest, pressures, rather than solely referring to research and judgment. He talks about how these decisions and policies are biased and often reflect societal conflicts. Some examples of these that he mentions within the article are like social values, economic priorities, or culture among stakeholders such as teachers, admin, board members, parents, or politicians. He uncovers the gap between curriculum design versus instructional and classroom practices. So the idea of what students and teachers should know versus what they actually do within the classroom. He argues how successful implementation depends on the focus and understanding of classroom and teaching realities while balancing the political goals and constraints made by the government and admin or the district itself. And then he uses the case study of Ontario's math curriculum and their controversial proposal of removing calculus to highlight how changes within education can spark strong reactions, whether it be positive or negative. And he concludes his article by arguing how any decisions are inherently political. So, for example, education is never neutral, school changes, and anything that has to do with education will always be driven by societal values, politics, and power structures. Um, I picked this article and I thought that it was credible because it is a peer-reviewed article, and Ben Levin has personal experience both as a teacher, a government official for Canada, and he's a researcher. He uses his arguments. He explains his argument by using facts and evidence rather than opinions, and all of his article and arguments relate directly to professional development because it highlights how changes and PDs are often created by experts who have unrealistic teaching goals that are many teachers are not able to achieve in the classroom, or they are not able to achieve due to the lack of PDs available to them. Um, and he also discusses and I analyzed how you can't have these expectations without positive and meaningful professional development. These professional development and educational changes with Levin's factors in mind can help bridge the gap between policy and practice to foster realistic goals, collaboration, adaptability, understanding, reflection, and advocacy for teachers within the classroom and within our education system. Moving forward to kind of summarize what we talked about, curriculum decisions are never neutral. There are key political and societal factors that influence changes that overshadow the expert or research decisions. So there's also a gap between policy and practice. There's very unrealistic expectations for teachers without the PD and without these things in mind. And something that kind of brings it all together, a quote within his article was, for politicians, what people believe to be true is much more important than what may actually be true. Beliefs drives political action and voting intentions much more than facts do, which kind of relate to curriculum decisions.
As a team, to conclude this presentation, as a team, we found that all these articles express that professional development is essential for teacher learning and preparation. It should also be continuous and collaborative process because education is always evolving. That means that we need to be sharing ideas, do effective strategies and resources that help all teachers. It should also be relevant and meaningful to what is currently needed in the classrooms and in our schools. Teachers should also have an input of what professional development should be. And finally, professional development is the bridge between the theory and the practice.
And some things we would like to highlight, some insights and perspectives include the following. Standards, objectives, and curriculum design are all essential to providing focus and direction, but can hinder effective teaching and overall student success. The role of curriculum theory serves as a crucial bridge to analyze, guide, and change educational practice. Professional development should model active, reflective, and collaborative learning. Teachers need resources such as instructional materials, technology, curriculum support to successfully teach under new standards. And curriculum designs in education are never neutral. There are key political and societal factors that influence educational changes. Thank you for listening to our presentation on professional development.